Good morning. Today is March 6, 2025. My name is Paula de la Cruz-Fernandez, and I coordinate the Gainesville Business History Project at the University of Florida. We are interviewing today two members or past members of James Moore and Company, PL, an accounting firm in Gainesville. I want to thank you on behalf of all the team for your presence here today, for your experience. It is really a gift for the university, and for the community, and for, I would say, also the accounting industry, to have your experience recorded and hopefully preserved in permanence. If you can start by saying your names, and then when did you start in the company, and then we will start kind of casually starting into the kind of the history of the firm and your experience.
Well, I'm Bob Watson, and I started with James Moore and Company in September of 1977. I spent about 3 years working with another firm in Tampa, a firm known as Ernst & Ernst, now E&Y. But then I came here in 1977 and worked through, I think it was 2015, I believe, or 16, I forget what year I actually retired. But I worked total 40 years as a CPA.
And I'm Jay Hutto. I started with the firm in January of 1993. Before that, I was with firm Arthur Andersen in Orlando. And I'm currently a partner at James Moore and Company in the Gainesville office.
Wonderful. Why don't you, before we start talking about the company, why don't you tell me a little bit more about your education? How did you get into accounting? What was it when you started?
Okay.
How,
Well, I can start out being the elder gentleman here. I graduated from the University of Florida in 1970, thinking I was going to go to law school, but instead I had to go to the Army for a couple of years of active duty. And as I was getting off of active duty in 1973, went to a career counselor in the Army. They kind of mandated that junior officers do that. And they said that we were going to probably have a nationwide recession in the country, and that I really didn't want to go to law school because they thought there was an overabundance of lawyers and you ought to go to get a degree in accounting. So I went back and got a degree in accounting, but at the University of South Florida in Tampa, and then went to work for Ernst & Ernst and was there for about 3 years. And at the time, I thought they were going to move me, and I thought I would rather move myself, and went back to Gainesville because I was born and raised here and met my wife here at the University of Florida, and we liked Gainesville quite a bit. So I interviewed with two firms here in Gainesville. One was an older established firm, Purvis Gray, and had a good interview with them, and they gave me a job offer. It was the first time they'd ever made an offer to somebody coming out of one of the national firms. But then the next day I happened to meet with James Moore and Company. It was known then as Moore, Cobb and Company, and met one of the partners there who was a real breath of fresh air, Keith Pettaway. I wish we could get him in here. He would be a great resource as well. But he was formerly with Arthur Andersen and a very brilliant man. Met with him and really enjoyed that interview. The firm, I'd never heard of Moore, Cobb and Company. I didn't know Jim Moore at the time, even though I'd grown up here in Gainesville. But Keith Pettaway said that they were trying to hire the best and brightest accountants, and they were getting a lot of folks that had come from the national accounting firms, and they wanted to hire them and retain them. So they were trying to grow the firm, and that's how I started with James Moore and Company. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit because they hired me. It was called Moore, Cobb and Company, and then I had to continue working in Tampa for another couple of months, but then came back in that September. And the day I showed up, they had renamed the firm James Moore and Company because prior to that, Jim Moore had a series of partners, and it seemed like folks coming in or out of academia or in the CPA world, and they would kind of change the name of the firm every few years to reflect the names of the partners. And I think the partners decided it would be best to keep one name, just sort of a branding issue, and that way they didn't have to pay the stationery printers this extra money to change the name every year. But the day I showed up, it was named James Moore and Company. So technically, I'm the first James Moore and Company employee, as the firm is now known.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Gainesville, went to Gainesville High School. And in Gainesville High School, they actually had a test that you could take, and it would tell you what professions would fit your profile.
What test was it?
I don't know what it was called.
Was it the MBTI or?
Yeah, I don't recall, but I remember taking the test.
An aptitude test of some sort?
Yeah, they told me I should be an accountant, an actuary, or a systems analyst. So,
did you like numbers?
Yeah, I think it was just, the math. And so they offered an accounting class at Gainesville High School, and I took the class, and it seemed like everything sort of clicked. And at the time, I would call it relatively poor, but I love business. And I thought, well, this would be a good way for a poor guy to be in business or around business. And then having the accounting class clicked, I kind of started helping other kids in the class, and it just seemed like that made a lot of sense. So I chose accounting while I was still in high school, and then went on to get my bachelor's and master's at the University of Florida. And at the time, Arthur Andersen was sort of the predominant of the big four accounting firms, and I think they still do it, but back then they certainly tried to push their graduates here at the University of Florida to go with the big four, or big eight, I'm sorry.
Used to be
back then it was the big eight.
Four.
Yeah, now it's the big four. But back then it was the big eight. And so I met my wife at Gainesville High School, and we moved to Orlando and worked there. And then we knew long term we wanted to come back to Gainesville, similar to Bob growing up here. And so we interviewed with Purvis Gray, like Bob, Davis Monk, Richardson and Ellison, and James Moore. And Keith Pettaway, at that time, the managing partner that I referred to, he was also from Arthur Andersen. So I thought that was good. And the partner in charge of the Gainesville office, Ben Dorr, my wife was like, hey, I want to really meet the firm and kind of get to know whether they are in alignment with us from a kind of a family standpoint, basically. And so Ben and his wife Bonnie and me and my wife Janie, we all went to dinner at the Steak and Ale, and everybody really got along well, and so we decided to go with James Moore, and so that's when I started in January of 1993.
Wow, great. So let's talk about the firm now, the early days when you got in, Bob, and how was it working for the firm? Just tell me maybe about like one day, your first day at the firm. And I
was primarily an auditor when I started, but wanted to learn a little bit more about tax work as well. And that was one of the draws. Of course, they said, hey, you're going to do everything here. And but I did start out on some audits, and audits were a lot different back then because we didn't have computers.
Right.
We had 13-column work paper and 4-column work papers, and everything was paper. It was better here at James Moore Company in some respects than at Ernst. And Ernst, in that at least starting accountants got a calculator. When I was a brand new staff accountant at Ernst. In Ernst, they for the first year you had to use an adding machine because I guess they didn't trust you to multiply and divide back then. And anyway, here they gave everybody calculators so we could now multiply and divide in addition to add and subtract. There were no computers. And when we'd go out to the field, we'd have to carry just bags of work papers from the prior year, and the process was pretty slow at the time. But again, that was what it was. We didn't know any differently, and nobody knew any differently in the accounting world at the time. Shortly, I guess a few years after I started in '77, I would say it was probably the early '80s is when computers came along. We had our first little kind of a portable computer type thing that had a screen that was maybe 4x5. I don't know if you remember seeing some of those old things. They were built like a suitcase.
Compacts?
Well, these were pre-compact.
Oh, really?
And they had a screen about yay big, which was would challenge your vision. But it did have something similar to SuperCalc on that, which we thought was amazing. And then shortly thereafter, we started getting the bigger, like the compact suitcase computers that had a screen that was maybe twice as big, and they did have SuperCalc, and then Lotus that came on board. And it did make things a good bit faster, although there were some disasters. We didn't have good backups back then, and sometimes I can remember spending most of a morning entering data into one of these SuperCalc spreadsheet type deals, and kind of kick back and hit the switch on the extension cord and turn the thing off. And they didn't have the backups like they do now, where everything backs up automatically, so I had to re-enter everything. But there was a continued evolution of technology over the period, and the accounting and auditing software improved dramatically, and then ultimately we went from 40 pounds of paper and boxes of files to everything's on your computer, and everything was paperless when I left, and it's probably much better now.
How many people would you say worked at the office when you started?
When I started, again, things were in a state of flux because they had just separated between Moore Cobb and Company. Don Cobb was a named partner, and apparently they had a disagreement with Don Cobb over some things. He ran an office in Palatka, and there were maybe 3 or 4 employees over there. The firm as a whole had probably around 40 employees, maybe 35 or 40 accounting types, and maybe another 10 or so staff type people, or support staff. And most of the work was contained here in the Gainesville area. And in 1977, when I was here, Gainesville was kind of in a no-growth situation. It was very, very hard to grow a firm. Also, back in those days, CPA firms were not allowed to market. Everything was word of mouth, and there were some pretty severe restrictions as to what CPAs could do, as far as you could not approach a potential client. They had to approach you. Otherwise, you could be in pretty serious ethical trouble with the Florida Institute of CPAs or the State Board of Accountancy. That changed fairly dramatically, and probably in the late 80s, I think is when it was. Do you recall, Jay? When
it seemed like it was right around 90. Yeah.
Okay. And anyway, so
did the laws change about that? Or
yes, it was nationwide for CPAs. It was sort of an ethical requirement. But then I guess the lawyers all started doing they used to be bound by the same rules at one time, and there was no TV advertisement for lawyers way back then. But anyway, we were in an industry that sort of chained itself to not growing that much, and then the Gainesville area and this region of Florida was not growing very much. Our government was sort of in a no-growth environment. They did not want to expand the residential areas and businesses, and we had clients that were trying to expand and had difficulty doing so at times. But even so, we didn't grow very rapidly. But I think it's probably in the early 80s we opened an office in Alachua, and then we also opened one up in Tallahassee. And then shortly thereafter, we merged with a firm in Daytona Beach. But in order to make that happen, we would send people over from the Gainesville office to help out with clients. And I used to have to spend a lot of time on the road driving between here and Daytona Beach. And the growth was still fairly slow, a lot slower than we wanted it to be. But we got kind of lucky in some respects, in that I don't know if you want to go into specialized type things, but we probably in the early 1980s, about 1983 or thereabouts, we started doing some work with colleges and universities. And actually here at the public broadcasting was an entree, and it just happened with a phone call. And it was one of those, again, we could not approach clients. They had to approach us. And there was a lady at the public broadcasting here named Pat Elrod, and she's passed on now, but she called to, because she was given the assignment to go find an auditor for the public broadcasting here at the University of Florida. The federal government required them to be audited, and she looked through the yellow pages and the phone books that nobody has nowadays, and noticed that James Moore and Company had more female CPAs listed than any of the other firms in their ads. So she called and talked to a young lady who was fairly new but was a CPA, and she got the call, and things worked out that we picked up that client. And then, beyond that, that led to us picking up some other public broadcasting stations throughout the state of Florida. And from that, we started picking up some athletic departments, and the firm, Jay can let them know a lot more about that, because when I was there, we were doing quite a few jobs throughout the state of Florida and other places that were public broadcasting related or university athletic department related. So, and then we picked up other things university related beyond just those two type things. So from what I understand, it just took like me getting out of the way before they could really launch themselves and do a heck of a lot more work. But they are, I think they've expanded it dramatically since the time I've left, from what I gather. And but the firm, I don't know if you want to go even back into James Moore or back in his early days.
That was my next question. From your conversations maybe with him, from knowing the context, what do you think, if Gainesville wasn't growing, what do you think made him start a company?
Jim Moore was a professor in accounting here at the University of Florida. And he was a very outgoing man. He had muscular dystrophy and was a paraplegic. And when I knew him, he was confined to a wheelchair. But when he came to the University of Florida, I think he used crutches or canes, but very outgoing, very upbeat man, great storyteller, personable as could be. And he, as he was a professor here at the university, decided he would have a part-time business starting, and I think he started in 1964, doing mostly tax work for folks that would come around. Legend has it that his very first client was Charles Perry. Charles Perry Construction is a big name throughout this region, and Chuck Perry did a lot of work for the University of Florida as well as all over this part of Florida. Yeah. Anyway, but from Jim said that that Chuck was his first client, and he charged him $25 to do the tax return. So that was a lot of money back in 1964, maybe. I don't know. It was enough. But Jim started out sort of maybe casually, and then from what I understand, over those 10 or 12 years before I started, he went through, he would have other people like either university professors or other CPAs that would join in with him as partners. And again, I think I mentioned earlier that people would come and go. The names on the letterhead would change every now and then. And probably about 1980 72 or 3 is when the firm really started to gel. That's when Keith Petaway came on board, and there were 2 other partners, a fellow named Kurt Green and Ed Goolsby, who recently passed away. The 3 of them kind of got together, and they started putting some procedures in place to try to make this a little bit more professionally run, because it was more casually run, I guess, prior to that. Jim was a great outgoing person, but I don't know that the administration of the firm was his specialty. Keith Petaway took a real liking to understanding how to administer and run CPA firms, and would go to conferences all over the country learning how to improve those skills. And he did spend a lot of time and effort doing that. The firm grew, again, fairly slowly from 77 till probably maybe the early 80s, and then it started taking off. I think we started picking up more work outside the city of Gainesville area, and when we started doing that, it just seemed needed to have more people. And sometimes when you pick up a client in one industry, they will tell other people how you've done so well that, and they really enjoyed working with them. Well, they would say, well, why don't we use them? And so we would, again, going from one university-related client to having probably a dozen or more, it required a lot of people and a lot of people driving on the roads, because we didn't have the ability to work from home back then. We had to be in a face-to-face relationship. But the industry certainly has changed. And from when I saw it, everything was pencil and paper, to now everything is electronic, and you can have people working from Alaska as easily as you can from across the street. So.
Yeah. Did you want to tell me when you came to the firm, and if it had, maybe by the 90s, had changed the industry, and how you found the firm and everything?
Yeah, so at the University of Florida, School of Accounting, I took all of these classes, and at the time, I navigated towards tax. So Dr. Boyles, Dr. McGill, those were tax professors at the time that I had. And I just felt like I needed to get a master's in tax at the University of Florida. So I went on with Anderson, was in the tax department, but then I asked them, I said, look, in downtime or whatever, if I could work on audits, I would really like to do that as well. So I came to James Moore in the tax department. And in the summer of 1993, Bob Watson came to me and he said, Jay, you're not a tax guy. And I said, Bob, what do you mean? I mean, I got a master's in tax. I've been working in tax. What do you mean? He said, Jay, he goes, look at your future. Do you want to review tax returns and do tax research? Or do you want to actually go out to where the client is, see what they do, how they do it, make recommendations on how they could potentially do it better, and then review and have relationships with the owners and that type of thing? And I said, oh, well, you're right. That kind of back to my, being the poor boy that wanted to be in business, that seemed to fit better with what worked for me. And so I told Bob, I came back to Bob and I was like, Bob, I think you're right. I think I need a switch. I don't know how to do it. And so Bob was like, well, I think you just need to express that that's your interest. And of course he helped me. And I switched over to what we call the accounting and auditing department, or A&A. And so, and at that point, Bob became my mentor as well, right? So, so I just sort of followed Bob in a lot of areas. And then Bob did, he talked about he developed higher ed, but he was also working in nonprofit. He was also working in government. He was also working in healthcare, which I lead today. And he was actually preparing tax returns in his office, which was, I think he's the only partner to do that, and give them the tax returns when they left and they walked out the door with it. So Bob was building all of these things, while he was mentoring a new staff person like me as to where I should be in my future. So that was all very helpful. And then one of the things that Bob mentioned that reminded me was Jim Moore, because of his disability, he needed help. So he always had a driver, helper, someone like that was with him during the day. I don't know if they were with him at night, but I know they were with him during the day.
I don't think so.
Yeah. But one of those people was my wife's uncle, Nat Hadsock. And Nat Hadsock was one of those assistants, and later on became an accountant and opened up his own firm in Alachua. So it's interesting the impact that Jim Moore had on, thousands of employees, at this point, thousands of clients, and then all of these peripheral type people that he helped along the way. And then today, I think we're almost 300 people. So a lot has changed in that time period.
How has the partnership structure and kind of process worked? So from when you started, did you become a partner at some point?
Yes, I did.
And how does it work for someone that will become, eventually become a partner?
Early on, at one point in time, I became a partner in 1983.
Okay.
But at one point in time, they would make you a partner when they felt like they had to, whenever that was. I mean, if you built up enough business or technical expertise, the thought of you leaving the firm was enough to want them to make you a partner. That was kind of the approach they took. Now it's a little different, a lot different. I think you have to have all the above, not just a big client base or technical expertise. I think you have to have kind of really both. But when I started, the year I started was when Jim Moore retired. And there was a big thought that the firm was going to collapse. And a lot of the firms, the CPA firms I've seen throughout, and because I used to do a lot of work in the peer review area where you'd go look at other CPA firms and make sure they were doing things like they were supposed to according to the professional standards. And this was something that the American Institute of CPAs sponsored to try and improve the overall expertise in the firms. But one of the big problems with James Moore and Company is we had to develop our expertise too, and we were able to do that, I think, for the most part. But one of the things that a big concern locally was when Jim left, we were going to have to pay him out as a partner. And the economics of CPA firms can be fairly dramatic at times when you have partners coming and going. Some firms require you to buy into them. James Moore and Company never did, which was kind of maybe unusual at the time. And anyway, the firm went through some pretty tough times that first year. When I became a partner, I actually had to, we would get paid, and then every month I'd have to pay a little back in. And my wife was not real happy with that, but it was only for the first year, just because we were trying to grow. And the way you grow is you pay your employees, and the partners just have to live with what's left. And it was that first year was kind of tight, but after that, things became much better. I don't know if you can probably continue on into the 90s, Jay, but the 80s were kind of a growing period for the firm. The industry was changing dramatically, especially with allowing firms to market, and our travel budget increased quite a bit. I mean, we had people all over the road. We had some of our employees did not like traveling, so that became a problem. Fortunately, we were able to get enough people in that were amenable to traveling, and then later on, I guess now you don't need to travel nearly quite as much. So I'm not sure how you get away with that, but how do you get away with no face-to-face type things? That's a Jay question, because mine was all face-to-face. So
how did it change after?
Yeah, so we have, in the 90s, we hired a marketing person. So we're now able to market. We hired a marketing person, and things started to develop as a career. We also have a career ladder. So the career ladder starts, you come in as an associate, then you move to a senior, then you move to a supervisor, manager, senior manager, director, then partner. Okay. So now everyone knows where they are and where they're going, their next step. We have what we call accountability plan. And on that accountability plan, it kind of lets you know, hey, here's the things that you need to do to get to that next level. We also have development coaches. So development coaches have called coachees, and we meet monthly going over the accountability plan and helping them so that everybody knows kind of where they stand. We found that people just kind of were just wanting to get that feedback, wanting to kind of like get real-time feedback, but also not wanting to be in the dark as to what they needed to do to get to the next level. So hopefully, if we hire the best and the brightest, they're motivated and they want to know, what does it take for me to progress, right? And so we've kind of built that system with accountability plans and development coaches for helping everyone get through their career ladder. But at the same time, there used to be this philosophy of up or out, meaning you needed to be where you were progressing or you were leaving, right? And so I remember that we had a partner meeting, and I threw out the concept of karate. And in karate, everybody's on a journey, the same journey, but not the same destination. And in fact, there isn't a destination, but you can actually go along the journey and you can stop at any point in time, and it's fine. We're all together on the same journey, but that's not necessarily the same spot in that path. So we actually have people now that will probably stay at a level for the rest of their career, and that's their choice. Whether it's they don't want to hit the next, either they're part-time or they don't want to do what it takes sort of to get to that next level or whatever the case may be, right? So we kind of added we felt like the best of both worlds. One is there's not that pressure that you have to move on, but there is at least a plan and assistance and mentoring and everything that you need to know where you stand and how to get to the next level. And so we were a little bit apprehensive because it's so hard to find good accountants. That is this going to be good? Are they going to receive it good, or is it going to be received negatively? And so thankfully at this point, it seems like it's been received well, and we seem to do well in recruiting, so that it seems to have worked for both sides, right? It's a win-win for both sides. We feel good that we are providing them with everything we can to train. We do feel like we're a training organization, so we feel like we're doing everything we can to train them, mentor them, help them progress, help them stay still if they want to stay still. We do have a flexible kind of work environment, so we have people who work from home in town. Most of our people, I think, work in the office, but we have people now who work across the country. So we have people who work in Tampa, South Florida, Georgia, Wisconsin, all over the country.
Is this structure coming from the 2000s? When would you say is the date that?
Yeah, so from a partner standpoint,
yes,
there was the more informal. Today, that accountability plan, a career ladder, at the manager, starting probably at the manager level, it becomes, instead of just being qualitative, which qualitative is still good, meaning you need to be technical, you need to be client service focused, but there also becomes some numbers attached to it. So those numbers are going to be in the areas of we call it billings, or how much are you how much of your client work are you managing? What are you bringing in? Business development goals, our goals, realization. Realization is we have a certain we keep track of our time, and everybody has a billing rate, so it creates this work in process or these accumulated charges, and then you bill it. Well, sometimes you can't bill what your charges are. There's a variety of things that can occur. So realization is the percentage of WIP, or work in process, or accumulated charges that you actually bill and collect. So that is one of the standards. You've got to have your hours. You've got to have good utilization, realization, technical billings, all of those kind of factors, and that helps. That determines whether you become a partner today.
Right. But would you say that was set up around the 2000s? Like it's been that way for a couple of decades?
Some of that has.
Yeah, I would say maybe 2010.
Okay.
Certainly, it was probably more formalized. It gets more formalized really every year, but certainly by like when I became a partner, I had to take a pay cut my first year, similar to Bob, and I came in with two other partners, and we called ourselves the Three Amigos, and we were told that we could become a partner, but it was really to be determined whether you actually made any money, like or made anything more than what you were making the year before. And in our case, when you factored in the fact that we had to pay our own taxes and things, we actually took a pay cut the first year. And then I gave up probably $25,000 of vacation or PTO or whatever we call it now. And so, but those are the things you kind of have to do as an owner. You have to. We've certainly had along the way since I've been a partner. We've had years where we took pay cuts, where we're giving raises, right? So you have all those kind of issues as an owner.
Sure. Yeah. No, we'll talk about those too. Yeah. You mentioned marketing being there when it started. How has it changed? What were the main, and I guess now we can also talk about clientele. What was your focus? You wanted a specific clientele, I'm imagining, or not? I don't know.
That has definitely progressed. So when I came in 93, we had no marketing person.
Right.
We added a marketing person, and for years we had a marketing person. Okay. Today we have a marketing department, and because of that, we also became what we call segmented. So we talk about our segments. I'm going to probably miss some, but our segments are government, nonprofit, construction, real estate, healthcare, higher ed, manufacturing. Can you think of any others? I think I captured most of them. Bob, like I said, started a lot of those, right? But becoming segmented meant that we tried to develop teams that would serve those types of clients and also do business development for those types of clients. So being responsible for healthcare, we're creating videos, we're creating articles, we're going to conferences, we're part of associations. And so all of these types of things just sort of segment our marketing and be more targeted. Right. So now our marketing is where at one time it was non-existent. Today it's very targeted.
That must have been hard to not be able to tell people, I can do this for you.
You had to be absolutely silent. You couldn't say a thing. Now you could go to conferences.
But everyone needs an accountant, right?
They do. I mean, especially in the audit world. But that was where the real problem was a lot of people would get an auditor and they didn't know whether they were getting a good audit or a bad audit. Right. Or the people, they didn't know if the auditor really knew what they were doing. In fact, that was what kind of led to our first opportunity outside of here. I mean, we picked up the job here in Gainesville and at the public broadcasting, and there was that lady that Pat Elrod was she was a bookkeeper, and somebody you would think may never be in a position to help you. Because she was kind of a low-level bookkeeper type, but she received a call from somebody at the University of South Florida in Tampa, their public broadcast operation, and they were not sure that the auditor there was doing a really good job. They didn't know if he knew what he was doing, and they said, "Well, do you have a CPA firm up there doing your work?" And he said, "Oh yeah." And she says, "Well, we really like them, and they know what they're doing," and that created an opportunity for us to go down there. Because we were asked, we couldn't approach them; they had to approach us. And that was the old way of marketing, and that job led to another job because somebody else at another operation, actually, it was their athletic department at the University of South Florida, and then the one at Florida Atlantic and Florida International and UCF, and then University of Florida and FSU, and all these other things just started rolling into place, and it created a lot of opportunities for more people in our firm to be busy doing things. And
So universities are a big client.
higher ed is.
What other clients like?
We call that segment higher education.
Right.
It includes foundations, athletic associations, so radio and public radio and TV
Public
stations,
broadcasting.
public broadcasting.
And DSOs too, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Direct support
Direct-
organizations.
yeah.
They would other direct support organizations within universities.
So those clients are now across the country. So now we're serving those clients across the country. The higher ed group is very, very active in NIL. We actually have a consultant for athletic associations across the country just to address like NIL type issues and all of the
It's name, image, and likeness.
name, image, and likeness. Yes. So all of these issues that the athletic associations are having to deal with the new rules for players and yeah. So it's a change. Higher ed is definitely in flux and is very active right now.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the competition and how. So you talked about the beginning, those four, and then how has that changed? Like, how is the competition now?
Well, I talked at the beginning here in Gainesville. There were really three big firms. There was Purvis Gray was the old line firm, been here forever and ever, and that's again who I interviewed with, and I almost went to work with them because they gave me a very nice offer, and but then I met one gentleman there who came in right at the tail end of the interview and told me that I was the very first person that they had ever made an offer to coming out of one of the big 8 accounting firms, and that if you have any, don't go telling us all the great ideas you had down in Tampa with Ernst and Ernst. We like what we do here. And I thought, well, heck, I'm not sure I like that idea. And that's when the next day I was ended up meeting with Keith Petaway, and just more by happenstance. And anyway, he said, we're trying to hire the best and the brightest, and we're trying to steal good ideas if you got any. So that was really what sealed the deal for me, because I was not sure that I was going to go to work under those circumstances at the other firm. But Purvis Gray has been here forever, and the other firm, there was a spinoff of Purvis Gray. It was Davis Monk and Company. Those two of those fellows had worked with Purvis Gray. They were young guys, and they had a sort of a partnership structure there that that would not let younger folks come into it very easily. And they decided, well, heck, we're doing all the work. Let's just start our own firm. And that's what they did. And, and they grew to a fairly good-sized firm themselves, specializing mostly in governmental work. Back at the time we were here, and they did some tax work as well, but mostly governmental type work. And James Moore Company was doing a little bit of audit work here and there, and grabbing whatever work was available, but there was just not that much because the area was not growing. And we decided to try and grow by changing locations, and we had or adding a location. The first real one was in Tallahassee. We had a sort of a mini office up in Alachua, but that didn't really work out too well.
What year was that?
That was probably in the late 70s. We opened an office up there, but it was only there for a couple of years because it really, the folks, we thought at the time there was some noise that IBM was going to open an office in Alachua. I don't know if you recall that or not. But yeah, we thought, oh boy, there's going to be thousands of people coming in, and they're going to need all this accounting work. So we opened up the office there, and it was.
They did open an office in Millhopper.
Really?
IBM had an office there. Yeah.
Okay.
But
it was not the manufacturing site that they were anticipating. So anyway, we sent a fellow up there a couple of times a week. That was Lewis Martin, and he kind of answered the phone like once a day, and that was about it. So we realized that was not the best move. But they did open, they moved Lewis up to Tallahassee and started an office up there, and it did pretty well. We had one good client up there in the real estate development world, and he had a lot of other contacts, and that helped our office grow up there. But there was a lot of competition going back and forth. We'd swap off a client here and there, but again, we could not market. Nobody could at that time. And especially where I guess the big change was doing governmental work. That's where we would do a lot of audit work, like cities and counties and various other not-for-profits that we would swap every now and then, because some of them had, some of the organizations had requirements that they had to change auditors every 3 to 5 years, which was kind of inefficient, believe it or not, because there's a lot of turmoil that comes as far as staffing and learning how to do the work. But that was kind of what the early game was at that point. I don't know if you can take on what the competition is now. I have no clue.
Yeah, and if you can tell me, how do you think that competition changed, like affected the company and the strategies and decisions?
Yeah. So Purvis Gray has remained independent. James Moore has remained independent. James Moore was built to some degree to remain independent for some of the reasons that Bob mentioned earlier, where James Moore doesn't have a buy-in, but it really doesn't have much of a buyout. So it really retains its equity within the firm. But Davis Monk did sell. So Davis Monk joined a firm called Carr Riggs out of, I believe, Alabama.
Well, actually, they started in the Panhandle.
Okay, Carr Riggs did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think they moved their bulk of their operation up to Alabama, but I did their first peer review.
Yeah.
on that.
So Carr Riggs now is a top 20 firm. So for example, we're probably right at 120 in the country as far as size, but Carr Riggs is a much larger firm. Their office here is still small, but the firm itself is bigger. So there's already been, from a competition standpoint, a transition in a firm, one of the 3 bigger firms in town. As far as new competition, though, we really haven't seen any new firm. So James Moore was in 1964. Purvis Gray was before that.
And the 40s, I think.
40s, maybe. And then do you remember about when Davis Monk started?
Yeah, it would have started probably about 75 or 6, because they had just started before I came on board with James Moore Company.
So the 3 biggest firms in Gainesville were between the 40s and the 70s. And so now for 50 years, there hasn't been a new accounting firm. Speaking of the lack of growth, right? If just the area, there hasn't really been a large accounting firm started or even relocated to here. So there's plenty of small firms, that come and go. But as far as the 3 larger firms, those have been relatively stable for this community. Today, it's interesting in the history of firms in general. There have been these moments where H&R Block wanted to buy accounting firms, or American Express wanted to buy accounting firms. Today, there is private equity. So private equity is, they're wanting to buy everything, but they certainly have accounting firms on their list. So there's a lot of, we're literally getting emails daily about either a firm that's taken private equity investment or firms that are consolidating. There is a lot of flux with accounting firms that started probably maybe 2 years ago, but we're right in the middle of it right now. And so it'll just take some time to figure out whether those transactions will be successful and why they're doing it. Because our firm was built to not have to have those big checks that you have to write with we're not under any real pressure, financial pressure, like some other firms that may not have the money to buy out retiring partners. We don't have that pressure because we don't have that structure, really.
That was one of the things that I noticed, because I used to do a lot of those peer reviews, and they would be throughout the country. One of the things that led to a lot of firms just having to restructure or partners just leave and start new firms was because of buyouts. If you had an older partner or older partners, as they started to leave, there were sometimes tremendous amounts of money that had to be paid to them, and that would just destroy the firm. And in fact, that was really my very first partner meeting at James Moore Company. We had a buyout type plan, and I had been on some peer reviews prior to that, and realized that was a big problem for a lot of firms. So I posed the question to all the partners: well, has anybody given any thought to what amount of money we would have to pay if people started retiring? Because we knew when Jim Moore retired, we were going to have to pay him this amount of money. But what happens when, you, and I'm the new guy here, I'm going to be left holding the bag. And I don't think I can afford to pay all you guys if you retire now or get hit by a beer truck on the way home. So this is going to be a problem. And one of the partners took me aside. That was Chuck Kleinschmidt, who was new to the firm. He said, "Bob, don't worry about it. It'll all be taken care of." And then he started thinking about it himself. And this was right when we had SuperCalc, because nobody really had the ability to push things out on paper and pencil too easily. And they put it on SuperCalc. He had one little kid who was a genius in such matters. And he said, "Well, let's do this. Let's start putting out what would happen if people start retiring." And he came back to our next partner meeting like 6 months later and says, "Guys, we need to kind of look at this." And that's when they did a dramatic change in the way retirement was structured in the firm, just so that they could afford it, because they were not, a lot of firms don't, CPA firms don't fund their retirement plan currently. I mean, they won't put money away in it like in a 401k or an IRA or anything like that. But we decided we needed to do that based on the way the plan was structured. They've since changed it. They changed it actually while I was in the firm to such that you didn't have a huge payout to that was unfunded for the partners. So anyway, that was a thing that can destroy firms very quickly if you're not careful.
Very interesting. Let's talk about some challenges. I really want to talk about technology also, but challenges in that, like key dates that were challenging. So it sounds like maybe an economic crisis, maybe 2008 was, a real problem. I'm not sure for accounting how COVID affected, or
that's a J question.
And maybe even perhaps the 2000s and the 9/11 attacks. I mean, things. Have you seen? What dates do you think like kind of marked a transition in the company, a key change, or a challenge that was just
I can take maybe the early side. I mean, we had some recessions in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there would always be periodic recessions, but for the most part, it didn't affect accounting firms. Sometimes we would grow when the recessions came, because a lot of times we had clients that would come from larger firms, like some of the national accounting firms, saying, "We've got to save some money and we want to get a high quality firm to do the work." And we would find many cases that we would grow when recessions came about. We weren't recession proof, and our clients were not recession proof, but we tended to grow in those earlier years. And again, some of the clients that we had, especially if we got into governmental and or the higher education type things, those are fairly stable clients. I mean, they had to have the work and they appreciated the work that was done. So I didn't really sense that. Now, that we did have some clients that were in construction business type things, they would see it. But again, it may be a delayed effect, because they would have contracts in place that they would have to run through, but the new ones would not come on board. So,
yeah, and as I think through some of those key things, you had Y2K in 2000, right? Which was interesting because I remember James Moore being very concerned, and all of our clients were concerned, and it kind of happened without really much of an event. So it was, fear without the reality. In 2000, certainly in 2008, big reality, and it did affect the firm. And that was certainly a year where, I took a pay cut and was giving out raises and those kind of scenarios. And that was just because clients, for example, were downsizing. They either, they didn't need to go after a bond if they were in construction because there was no construction, or the banks were being a little more lenient, or whatever the case may be. So they weren't requiring the audit side. And so when I say the audit, we're talking about audit of financial statements. So In the government and nonprofit world, they are required to have audits, but in the commercial world, they're not so much required to have an audit of their financial statements. So anything that became discretionary, people didn't do because they were trying to survive, right? And then COVID was one of those, kind of like what Bob was saying, where when COVID happened, it distorted our operation, meaning we were 95% of our people were coming to the office every day. When COVID happened, we dispersed to our homes. And now we're probably maybe 75% in the office, maybe.
That's quite a lot.
That's still probably higher than most, right? But we now hire people. Like it used to be, if you were working remote, it was because you worked with us for a long time. You moved away, and we jointly decided to keep you as an employee remote. Today, though, we hire remote. We, and we let people who work in town work remote. I mean, it's just super flexible. It really just becomes a matter of whether you can work remote and be productive. So, but yeah, I mean, other than maybe 2008, we've been able to at least stay flat most years or grow.
Interesting. Let's talk then about technology. So you said all paper. I can't believe you just walked with it.
We would carry a 35-pound
trunk.
adding machine or calculator, and then we'd have another trunk with all the work papers in it.
Right.
And when he says calculator, he means like this big box with tape coming out of it.
Tell me about that. So that was the first. You already had that when you started.
I did, yes.
What was the next thing?
Those were adding machines. Or calculators with a tape. And then when we would do the work papers, we were required to get Scotch tape and tape those tapes into the work papers to show that we proved the numbers that we were adding up in many cases. So it was a pretty elaborate process that we went through. And that you'd have a staff person that would go out there and do certain procedures in the audit and in tax too, same thing. But then somebody always had to review it. And it'd be usually 2 layers of review at least, sometimes 3. In the audit world, in the tax world, typically there was only like 1, maybe 2 at the most layers of review. And that was one of the things that I always liked about James Moore & Company was that review process. Some of the firms that I encountered when I was doing peer reviews throughout the country didn't really do as thorough a review, and sometimes you pay the price. I mean, they could get through a job a lot faster, but sometimes the work was maybe not as good, truly. And
what was the next machine?
The next one was a little
or software.
It was like a suitcase, and I forget the name of the thing, but it was a magic machine. We thought it was great, and that was the one that had the 5-inch square screen that was very difficult to see, and you had 5-inch floppy disks, 2 of them, one for the program, one for the client file or whatever. We had that for about a year or so, and we thought we were just on top of things. Now, they're actually, James Moore Company did have a computer, but it was we had a computer operation where we would do client accounting, and it was a big machine. We had a room twice as big as this. It had a computer. No. Well, the Osborne was the little one built like a suitcase with a 5-inch screen.
Okay.
We had it was like a Honeywell or something type machine. It was not a mainframe, but it was like a smaller version of a mainframe where we had these huge disk drives that were probably big as a chest of drawers. Yeah, huge things. And we had maybe 10 people in a computer department, people that were just key punching folks, and we had a programmer guy, and we were doing a lot of client accounting type work back then.
It's like bookkeeping.
Bookkeeping type work for clients. But then the next thing with the compacts, where we had a lot more flexibility and stability, and they had Lotus on there, which was a pretty nice spreadsheet calculating type thing. But we really didn't have any specialized accounting software. And then there was and in the audit world, which is what Jay and I were used to using mostly, they had nothing until this thing called FAST came along. I don't know if you remember that, but we had one of our former partners who had started a practice down in Tampa was telling me about it. So he loaned me a copy just to try it out. And I went back and I told the other partners that I'm going to try it on a job just to see how it works and see if it actually speeds up the process. Mm-hmm. Well, it was a large hospital job. And a hospital, from an accounting perspective, has got a lot of accounts, and it takes a lot of time to key in all the account names, numbers, and amounts. And I thought, this is just taking way too long. It's going to cost us a lot of money. But then at the end of the job, I realized it would usually, when we were doing paper type stuff, it would take hours to close out the process, make sure everything balanced and whatnot. Well, at the end of the job, it just hit one button and boom, there it was. Everything was done. I mean, we had our general ledger all balanced and the financial statements were done. And I said, well, this is amazing. So I went back to the partners and said, we've got to buy this. And they said, nope, not going to do it. It cost $400 or whatever. And I said, oh, come on. I said, this can't be that bad. And he said, well, nope. I said, we're not going to buy it. I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to buy it. And if you guys want to use it for me, I will lease it back to you. So they said, okay, we'll buy it. So they bought it. And then we never stopped after that. I mean, it just continued on the software like that. So, and then the next thing up, I guess we started having, at one point in time, for all our corporate tax returns, we used to do that manually. I don't know if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And the depreciation schedules were all done manually on 13-column work papers. But then we started slowly getting into good tax accounting software, and that sped up that game and improved the process quite a bit. And then we also had some tax software that we would use, but it was not in-house. What we would do is we would fill out all this input sheets, send it away, somebody would pick it up, and then they would bring a tax return down to us, it would get reviewed, and then we'd give it to the clients. Then ultimately we started doing it in-house when we started getting computers that would allow us to do that. And pretty soon everything was done at everybody's desks. And now I'm not sure how you do it, but it's probably the same way, but people can do it from their homes or wherever.
Well, I guess depending on what they're doing. But so Excel when was that?
It wasn't 93. So I started in 90. Okay.
Right.
It was I mean, I did not realize when I became an accountant that I needed to also be an art major, because when I first started, the 13-column pads were, like this big, right? Then we had 4-column pads. Then we had multiple color pencils. Yeah. Then we had we got big time when we had the clicker pencils, right? Yeah. And then you had to have, because you erased so much, because you did everything in pencil, you had to have a designated eraser that you could click down, because you had, so we were dealing with, and then we had the paper press supplies, we call them something else, the press supplies that you had to put on the holes of your paper, because you were using a ring to group your papers, and then you'd have this front and back. So your work papers were in these big steel binders, and then you'd have them go through the holes of the paper with the little reinforcements on the paper so they wouldn't tear out. And then you'd put the front of it where you'd say the name of the client and the year, and it was an audit or whatever. And so that's what we would walk around. So we'd usually have one for the current year, then we'd have one for the prior year, then we have what we call a permanent file, which would be like all of your notes, like your promissory notes and your articles and your contracts or whatever. We'd have a permanent file that we would need for every year. And so you'd have like 3 of these big ringed stacks of things in a trunk. That's that big. The trunk was bigger than a big suitcase. It was like a trunk that you put like a drum set. It was a big trunk, and then you'd have another bag that you'd have your calculator and all the papers and the pencils and the erasers and all that stuff. So you'd walk into an audit with these 2 big bags. So that's how it started. Right. Then we got to, I think my first computer was like the Compact. The Compact was, like a suitcase that you would actually flip the I don't know if it's the base or the top, and that would be your keyboard. And then it had that little screen that you could kind of like barely see. So, and then I remember, I can't remember at University of Florida, I think Lotus was really just coming in. And so Excel, back then, James Moore also always, from the time I was there, had this computer side of the firm. So we had an department that helped, and it was mostly bookkeeping. So we bought this computer that Bob wanted us to buy, and we would do the bookkeeping on a computer because none of our clients had computers. Right. So they would do all the processing of their transactions on this computer. Okay. So we always had that. So originally when I got there, we were like on a Novell network and we were using maybe Lotus. And then at one point we transitioned, and I don't know what time period that was, but it was probably maybe late 90s, 2000. We transitioned to a Microsoft shop. Okay. Which Microsoft meant we were using, I guess, the Microsoft network, and they were using Excel and Word and that type of thing. But that would have been maybe 2000-ish.
Okay.
Yeah. And then today, I have a TV almost as big as that on my desk, where I can quadrant in 4 quadrants, and that way I can look at basically multiple work papers at the same time and cross-reference everything on one screen. Right? So it's totally different today. It's really nice that I have a big screen TV effectively that I can quadrant out and see everything on the screen. And we're completely paperless. We have no paper, work papers of any kind.
So what is the software that you use today? Is it something
it's still Microsoft.
It's still that?
Yeah, but we use different audit software. It's called CCH.
Okay.
Common Clear.
Yeah, for engagement is the audit software.
Quick question: with all that paper production, when did you start? Did you have records management person right from the start?
Yeah, we did.
I'm just thinking about archives.
We had a room bigger than this that we would keep all of our work papers in. So it would have rows. It was probably twice as big as this, but it would have these steel things, and we would store all the work papers on the shelf. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And then we would go and we'd pull them. We'd pull like last year. We'd create a new one, and then we when we finished the job and delivered the audit or tax return, we'd put it all back in the file room. And then one day when I don't remember what year that would have been. Do you remember what year we went paperless? But it would probably early 2000-ish.
That's early.
About 2010, I would say for sure. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so 2001 in.
It was probably 2005 to 10, somewhere
maybe,
in that range.
Okay.
And what happened with the paper?
We had a big shredding party.
Yeah, we had a contract.
We had a contract shredder come and work for probably 2 weeks.
Wow.
Once we verified that it was all scanned and it was all available, then we shredded it all. And we still have shredders. So paper still exists, but it's not. We don't store anything in paper. It's usually for short term. Like today, if a client brings us documents, we scan it, and then we just at the end of the job we give it back to them.
Right. So this kind of transition, this digitization, transition to digital, it has already been going on for more than 2 decades.
Well before I left.
Probably 20 years.
Probably at least 20.
We've been paperless for 20 years.
Wow, that's. Let's talk a little bit about culture and leadership and work culture in the firm. I'm really interested about that's something Jay and I talked about. How many women are partners? How did that happen? Was it their push? Was someone else's push? Was kind of something that it kind of made sense?
Well, we hired females early on. I mean, they were female accountants when actually, we had, I think, one, maybe two when I came on board, or shortly after I came on board. And then we did have, some kind of went through the process of, they were very competent CPAs, but then they became mothers. Mm-hmm. Little babies sometimes would interrupt their careers at that time. And it was kind of hard for women in the 1970s to have a baby and then have a full-time accounting career, especially as an auditor, because as an auditor you had to travel and you had to be in a face-to-face environment. Now, some gravitated to tax where they could come in and be there in the office and not have to worry so much about traveling. But it was very difficult, I think, for women to have an accounting career and kids. We had one lady, Carol Villamere, who ultimately became a managing partner in the firm, who managed to negotiate that probably better than most. And we've had several of them since that have done that. I mean, where they've been able to manage families, raise kids, and also have an accounting career. They were able to balance it out very nicely. Something obviously has to give. I'm not sure, there's some time constraints that come into play, but Carol was a very talented CPA, and she gravitated into the leadership side of the firm. Some folks will become line partners, if you will. I mean, they're actually have more client interface than the leadership side of things. And I think, Jay, you're kind of that way. That's the way I was primarily. I enjoyed working with the clients more than I did dealing with the administration aspects. That's something one of the things I always hated was meetings. And I think I was notorious for that, but because I didn't find them very productive for the most part. Now, some people love to go to meetings. I enjoyed just meeting with clients and solving problems with clients if I could. But
what year did Carol become a partner, roughly?
If I had to guess, I would say it was probably in the early 90s, maybe.
It was definitely before 93. It must have been maybe 90.
I say about
maybe
90.
That was the first
female partner.
Female partner.
And then, it was kind of interesting too, because before that it was all gentlemen around. Maybe I should use that term loosely, but men around the partner table when we'd have our meetings, and
it may have been before that because Suzanne would have been next, right? And then Mary and Bernadette were partners when I came in 93. Right.
Okay, so it could have been
maybe
late 80s. Well, I was a partner in 83.
Okay, so maybe 89.
I think 89 or 90, perhaps. Yeah. But anyway, the conversation changed a little bit around the table, meaning before sometimes the conversation was a little cruder as far as the joke telling, but then it kind of trimmed down a little bit.
But by 93, there were already 4 female partners.
Yeah.
I would say for the last 10 years, it's been almost 50-50. The current managing partner is female, and Carol, the last managing partner, is female.
And one of the things, we noticed early on, too, when we were hiring people, and you could look at the seats that were filled in the accounting schools were mostly women. So at least I don't know if that's still that way, but I suspect it is. Yeah. So it was starting to reflect just the population of what was coming out of the accounting schools.
Do you think it was also part of perhaps Jim's style of leadership, or
Oh, absolutely, because it's not common. As a matter of fact, we've been recognized nationally for the opportunity for women, for the women leadership. We've received all of the awards you could possibly receive for just that being able to provide that opportunity, because it isn't normal. It is definitely different.
And how do you think that kind of?
I think it's Keith. What would you say?
Probably so. I mean, Keith Pettaway was just a very interesting gentleman.
He was the managing partner when I joined the firm.
And he was, he was not the managing partner when I joined. Jim Moore was. Yeah. And then they decided that I guess right when I became a partner is when Jim Moore retired. And that's when Keith Pettaway took over.
When that was, what, 77?
83.
83.
I started in 77, became a partner in 83. And
so since 83, that makes sense, because then Keith started driving this.
Yeah, Keith was a very, very forward-looking person, very serious about looking at, what makes a firm successful. And he, if you were to meet the person, you would not think that he was that way.
Why not?
Well, he is. When I met him, again, I had interviewed before with a firm where everybody was wearing the white shirts and the ties and whatnot. And of course, that's what I was used to wearing at Ernst. And so I meet Keith Pettaway, and he's got a pack of Marlboros. He's wearing a white shirt, and he's got a sunburned face, and talks like he is from a very rural area, which he is.
He's from Williston.
And talked like he had just gotten off the tractor, and he's wearing a white shirt with a short sleeve shirt, again with a pack of Marlboros in his top pocket. And I wasn't quite sure. Very disarming the way the conversation was, just because he was very personable and very smart. You could tell. But he's very disarming the way he talks, because he is so refreshing. And he, through the management of accounting practice program that he went through, I guess he learned a lot, and learned that there are some things that you can do, and realized that the world was turning female in the accounting world. So said, hey, we've got to make room for them.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the main policies that were made for that? Because so were there maternity leave, or was there any kind of agreement? Like,
there was some.
Your position will be still to be here when you come back.
Early on, there was not the kind of maternal leave that you see, or maternity leave that you see now. I'm not sure what it is at this point. Is it 60 days or?
Today we have not only maternity leave, we have paternity leave. So, for example, when my kids were born, I was back at work the next day.
Yeah.
Today, you can take an extended period as either spouses. So.
Yeah, there was no. I think it was maybe 30 days or something, or you would allow them to take vacation. And I'm not sure specifically what the policy was back then, but they were able to accommodate people who wanted to have children. And there were of the four first female partners, 2 never had children, 2 did, and they were able to work through it reasonably well. I mean, I don't think there were any complaints on either side, on the firm side or on their side. They just worked through it.
Wonderful. When did the paternity leave also start?
Maybe 5 years ago. For the paternity leave, yeah.
Wonderful. Let's start with the end, wrapping up.
Okay.
What do you think? And I guess Keith, I think that would be one of his legacy, being open for this kind of work culture. What do you think is Jim Moore's biggest, most important legacy? For
Jim Moore himself?
Yeah. For his
starting the firm, and being just a very optimistic person, especially considering the circumstances that he was in. When I met him, he was confined to a wheelchair. Right. And he did have, as Jay mentioned, he had assistants that would help drive him around, or help him negotiate ramps and get around here and there. But he was a very optimistic fellow, and he was also very big in trying to market, even before we were allowed to market. I mean, he had to abide by the rules, but he knew that we needed to kind of get out and about in the firm. And that's kind of how you could market in the early days, is you could join organizations, and you could kind of get elbow to elbow with people in the Rotary Club, or the this club or that club, and various not-for-profits, get on their boards, and people would get to know you. So by that was kind of Jim encouraged people to market. And he got into the Chamber of Commerce in a big way. I don't know if you were ever familiar with that, but the Chamber of Commerce was at least a way you could meet other business people, and they would get to know who you were. And Jim, again, was an extremely outgoing guy, and he was allowed to get out there and market chamber memberships, there was no prohibition on that. So, and when he did that, people would get to know who he was. So he tried to instill that ability to get out and meet other people to help market. So that was kind of the legacy that I would see. And he was that was his big strength. I mean, he was not. I wouldn't call him he was, I guess, as a professor in school, he was smart guy and very talkative, but he was again, I think his strength was marketing. Period.
Yeah, I think Jim Moore, being a UF professor, starting a CPA firm, he also owned a business. He was also involved in the chamber, and he was the whole time in a wheelchair. So when it's our partners, our staff, and you think about how you're having a bad day, and you think about what he had to overcome, it gives you a different perspective, right? So I think that the part of the legacy from at least our founder's standpoint would be how he overcame and how he was always positive about everything, right? Despite his circumstances. Today, I think, James Moore having a client service focus, having a client service heart, just trying to do whatever we can to help the client helps us grow and be successful today. So it's, like yesterday I had a meeting with a client who was a very accomplished person, very organized, but his father had passed away, and he was just so appreciative that, I was meeting with him and walking him through things that he had never had to deal with before, right? And so, clients are a lot of times apprehensive about finances, right? Their tax returns, their financials, their business, all of those things create a lot of stress. And so they rely on us to be their trusted business advisor and essentially, as calm as we can, walk them through that, right? Be there for them and walk them through those types of situations. And that's what we do every day.
Yeah. What's next in the next 20 years, maybe 10, 20 years? Where do you see the firm going?
So we now have 5 offices in Florida. Okay. So we have Tallahassee, Gainesville, Daytona, DeLand, and Ocala. I see the future. We've already identified some other cities, so I think that, and we've now done multiple acquisitions. So I think that the firm can kind of take that client service model and an independent model, so and kind of expand on it to serve more clients, right? So I think that there'll be continued growth. I think we have everybody seems to be dialed in as to, here's how we're going to serve clients. Here's how we're going to grow. Here's how we're going to help more people. Here's how we're going to develop our own people, those types of things.
Well, is there anything else? I'm sure we could talk for hours and we can schedule another interview, but I just want to say thank you so much for coming today. And I'm sure people will enjoy learning and listening to this interview. Just to wrap up, today is March 6th. We met with Robert Watson and Jay Hutto, and they have been partners, and they still are partners of James Moore and Company PL. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yes.